James Wilson wiped sweat from his forehead as he leaned against his tractor. The Georgia sun beat down hard, even in the early afternoon. He'd been up since dawn, trying to get ahead of the weather forecast that promised rain later in the week. His fields of soybeans stretched out before him, green and promising in the summer heat. The distant sound of vehicles on the main road caught his attention. Not just any vehicles, a lot of them, moving slowly. James frowned. This wasn't normal for their quiet country road that mainly saw farm trucks and the occasional tourist lost on their way to the lake. The rumble grew louder. James climbed down from his tractor and walked to the edge of his property where his land met the county road. He could see them now, black SUVs, police cars, motorcycles, a presidential motorcade. Well, I'll be, James muttered to himself. Everyone knew the president was visiting the state, but nobody expected him to come through their little corner of rural Georgia. James stood by his fence, watching as the motorcade approached. He wasn't political by nature, too busy working the land to pay much attention to the drama in Washington. But he had opinions, strong ones, especially about agricultural policies that had made life harder for small farmers like him. The motorcade slowed as it approached the stretch of road bordering James's farm. To his surprise, it came to a complete stop. The door of the middle SUV opened, and Secret Service agents spilled out, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. And then, stepping out into the Georgia sunshine, was President Donald Trump himself. James blinked in disbelief. What was happening? This wasn't a planned stop. The president's schedule was always mapped out to the minute. The small crowd that had gathered along the roadside seemed just as surprised, fumbling for their phones to capture the moment. Trump, in his signature dark suit and red tie, nodded to the onlookers and then, to James's astonishment, began walking directly toward him. "Beautiful land you've got here," Trump called out, approaching the fence where James stood rooted to the spot. "Is this your farm?" James nodded, finding his voice. "Yes, sir. Been in my family for 3 generations." Trump seemed genuinely interested, looking out over the fields. "How many acres?" 300, but I only own half. Rest is leased," James replied, surprised by the conversation. A small group of reporters had followed the president, cameras at the ready. This was the kind of unscripted moment that made their editors happy, the president talking to a regular American, and a black farmer at that. "How's business?" Trump asked, his tone casual but eyes sharp. Something stirred in James. Here was the man whose policies had direct impact on his livelihood, asking a simple question that had a very complicated answer. "Well, Mr. President," James said slowly, "it's been better. Tariffs hit us hard last year. Soybean prices dropped so low I almost couldn't cover my costs." Trump's expression didn't change, but James noticed a slight narrowing of his eyes. "We're working on better trade deals. Going to be great for farmers." "Maybe for the big operations," James replied. "But small farms like mine are struggling." A Secret Service agent stepped closer, clearly uncomfortable with the unplanned interaction, but Trump waved him off. "What's your name?" Trump asked. "James Wilson." "You always been a farmer, James." "All my life. Served in the Army too, Desert Storm. Came right back to the farm after." Trump nodded approvingly. "Thank you for your service." James felt the eyes of the growing crowd on him. Some were locals who knew him, others strangers who had stopped their cars to see what was happening. Camera phones were recording everything. "Mr. President," James said, deciding to make the most of this bizarre opportunity, "I've got neighbors who've lost their farms. Good people. Hard workers. The policies coming out of Washington, they're not working for us." Trump stepped closer to the fence. "Tell me specifically what's not working." James hadn't expected this. He thought the president would move on, shake a few more hands, and be gone. But here he was, asking for details. "Well, sir," James began, "for starters." Behind them, aides were checking watches and whispering urgently. The motorcade was running behind schedule. But Trump seemed in no hurry as he listened to James, the unlikely conversation between the president and the farmer continuing as the Georgia sun beat down on them both. No one, least of all James, could have predicted what would happen next. The sun beat down on the dusty road as the black SUVs came to a stop. Secret Service agents fanned out, their eyes scanning the area behind dark sunglasses. James stood by his fence, wiping sweat from his brow with a worn bandana. He had been checking irrigation lines when the motorcade appeared. "Who owns this land?" Trump called out, walking toward the fence in his blue suit and red tie, looking oddly out of place against the backdrop of cornfields stretching to the horizon. "I do," James replied, his voice steady despite his surprise. "Third generation to work it." The reporters hung back, cameras rolling. This wasn't part of the planned route, but the president had spotted the farm from the road and ordered the stop. Some staffers checked watches nervously. "Beautiful property," Trump said, extending his hand over the fence. James hesitated only slightly before shaking it. His calloused palm met the president's smoother one. "Thank you. Been in the family since my grandfather bought it in 1937. Trump nodded approvingly. "Good American story. How's business?" Something changed in James's expression. Later, when the video went viral, people would rewatch this moment, the shift from polite small talk to something more genuine. "Business," James repeated. "Well, sir, business is tough. Has been for years." An aide stepped forward. "Mr. President, we need to keep to the schedule." Trump waved him off. "These are the people I need to hear from, real Americans." James gripped the fence post. "With all due respect, Mr. President, your tariff policies have hit farmers like me hard. China was buying our soybeans until the trade war started." Trump's posture stiffened. "Those tariffs are bringing manufacturing jobs back to America. We're playing the long game." "The long game?" James's voice rose slightly. "Small farms don't have a long game anymore. We're just trying to survive until next season." A small crowd had gathered, farmhands, neighbors who'd heard about the unexpected visit. They watched in silence as the president and the farmer faced off. "My administration has given more aid to farmers than any in history," Trump countered, his voice taking on the familiar rally cadence. James shook his head. "Those subsidies mostly help the big corporate farms. Family operations like mine see pennies on the dollar." The president's face reddened slightly. "That's not true. That's just not true." "It is where I'm standing," James said. "And for other black farmers too. USDA discrimination isn't just history. We're still fighting it today." A low murmur ran through the onlookers. No one had expected James to be so direct. The cameras inched closer. "Look," Trump said, gesturing broadly, "unemployment for African Americans was at historic lows before the pandemic. My policies help all Americans." "Statistics don't pay the bank," James replied. "I nearly lost this place last year. The loan officer suggested I sell to one of those big agriculture companies. Said it would be easier for everyone." Trump frowned. "Who was this? I want a name." James laughed without humor. "It's not one person, Mr. President. It's a system." The presidential aides were growing visibly anxious now, but Trump seemed oddly engaged by the confrontation. "And what would you have me do differently?" he asked, his tone somewhere between challenging and curious. James didn't back down. "Start by understanding that farming isn't just business. It's history, it's family, it's community. When policies are made by people who've never had dirt under their nails, we all lose." One of Trump's advisors whispered something in his ear. The president nodded but kept his eyes on James. "You know," Trump said, "most people I meet either love me or hate me. Not many actually want to talk about issues." "I can't afford to just love or hate," James replied. "I need solutions." The sky, which had been clear blue moments before, suddenly darkened. Both men looked up as thunder rumbled in the distance. "Sir," a Secret Service agent said firmly, "we need to move. Weather report shows a severe thunderstorm approaching." The first fat raindrops began to fall, landing in the dust with audible plops. The presidential team scrambled to pack up equipment as the rain intensified. James glanced at his house, about 100 yards down the driveway. Then, surprising himself perhaps more than anyone, he called out over the growing wind. "My house is right there. You're welcome to wait out the storm." Trump hesitated, looking from his vehicles to the farmhouse. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and lightning flashed across the sky. To everyone's surprise, especially the Secret Service, the president nodded. "Lead the way," he said. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The rain came down in sheets, transforming the dirt driveway into muddy rivers. Secret Service agents rushed around the president, trying to shield him with umbrellas that quickly turned useless in the powerful wind. One agent spoke urgently into his wrist microphone, while another surveyed the farmhouse with suspicious eyes. "It's just me and my wife," James shouted over the storm. "And my dog Blue." Thunder cracked overhead, making everyone jump. A bolt of lightning struck a tree not 50 yards away, splitting the air with a deafening boom. "Inside now," ordered the lead agent, professional training overriding protocol concerns. They hurried toward the 2-story farmhouse, a white clapboard structure with a wraparound porch and green shutters that had seen better days. Secret Service agents went in first, water streaming from their dark suits. James followed with Trump beside him, both men hunched against the downpour. "Martha," James called as they stepped into the front hall. "We have visitors." James's wife appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes widened at the sight of the president and half a dozen soaking wet agents in her home. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, then quickly gathered herself. "Well, don't just stand there dripping on my floor. Come on in proper." The cramped entryway filled with people removing wet shoes and jackets. An agent spoke into his phone, explaining the situation to someone who clearly wasn't happy about it. Another checked closets and doorways, maintaining protocol despite the unusual circumstances. "Sorry about this," Trump said to Martha, running a hand through his damp hair. "Your husband was kind enough to offer shelter." "Any decent person would," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. "Storm doesn't care who you voted for." A small smile tugged at Trump's lips. "Fair enough." Blue, an aging black lab, padded into the room and sniffed curiously at the strangers. One agent tensed, but James put a reassuring hand on the dog's head. "He's all bark, no bite," James said. "Unlike some of us." The tension from their earlier confrontation still hung in the air, but the storm had changed something. Standing in James's home, not as opponents but as people seeking shelter, shifted the dynamic between them. "Let me get you all some towels," Martha said, disappearing down the hallway. Through the windows, they could see the presidential motorcade waiting in the rain. A few brave reporters huddled under a tree, no doubt speculating wildly about what was happening inside the farmhouse. "Quite a storm," Trump remarked, watching lightning flash across the sky. "April storms can be fierce," James replied. "But we need the rain, being too dry this spring." Martha returned with an armful of towels and directed everyone to the living room, a modest space with well-worn furniture, family photos on the walls, and a stone fireplace that looked like it had warmed generations. "Can I offer you some coffee or sweet tea?" Martha asked. "It'll be a while before this passes." The lead Secret Service agent tried to intervene. Standard procedure dictated they bring their own food and drinks, but Trump waved him off. "Sweet tea would be perfect, thank you." As Martha went to fetch the drinks, Trump walked around the living room, studying the photos on the mantel. He stopped at one showing James in military uniform. "You served?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. James nodded. "Army. 2 tours in Desert Storm." "My father fought in World War II," said one of the younger agents, then looked embarrassed for speaking out of turn. "Mine too," James replied, though he didn't talk about it much. When Martha returned with a tray of glasses, they all sat down, the President of the United States on a faded couch with a handmade quilt draped over the back, the farmer in his recliner, and agents perched uncomfortably on whatever seats remained. Through the window, lightning illuminated the fields in bright flashes. Rain drummed on the roof, creating a strangely peaceful backdrop to this improbable gathering. "So," Trump said after taking a sip of tea, "tell me more about these issues with the USDA. Not the talking points, the real story." James glanced at Martha, who gave him a slight nod. He set down his glass and leaned forward. "Well, Mr. President, it goes back generations, but I'll start with what happened to my daddy in 1986. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the farmhouse, something unexpected was beginning to take shape, a conversation neither man had planned for, but both might remember long after the rain stopped." James leaned back in his chair, his hands gesturing as he spoke about his father's struggles with loan denials in the 1980s. The rain continued to drum on the roof, creating a rhythm behind his words. They'd approve loans for white farmers with the same credit, same collateral, James explained. But my daddy would get turned down, year after year. Called it lack of experience, even though our family had been farming this land since before the loan officer was born. Trump listened, his fingers laced together, his expression thoughtful. The usual defensiveness that appeared when people criticized government policies was absent. And how about now? He asked. Still happening. It's more subtle, James said. But yes, the numbers don't lie. Black farmers get fewer loans, smaller amounts, higher interest rates. Martha appeared from the kitchen with a plate of homemade cookies. These were meant for the church social tomorrow, but I think we need them more right now. She offered the plate to Trump first, a small courtesy that didn't go unnoticed. He took one, thanking her with a nod. Your home is lovely, he said. Reminds me of places I visited growing up. Been in my family for 3 generations, Martha replied. Would have been gone by now if not for James's stubbornness. Determination, James corrected with a smile. Stubbornness is what you call it when it doesn't work out. Trump laughed, a genuine laugh, not the performative one from campaign rallies. My father used to say something similar. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the storm outside. Through the window, they could see the rain starting to let up, though dark clouds still hung low. Your grandkids? Trump asked, nodding toward a photo on the side table showing 2 children playing on a tractor. James nodded, pride softening his face. Thomas is 8, Lisa just turned 6. They live in Atlanta with their parents, but they spend summers here. Do they want to farm? Trump asked. James and Martha exchanged glances. We want them to have the choice, Martha said carefully. But the way things are going. I understand, Trump said, surprising them both. Family businesses, doesn't matter if it's real estate or farming, they're special. Different from just making money. One of the Secret Service agents by the window spoke quietly into his earpiece, then approached. Sir, weather report shows the cell is moving east. We should have a window to leave in about 20 minutes. Trump nodded but seemed in no hurry. He turned back to James. You mentioned veterans issues earlier. What's your connection there? I help run a program for vets transitioning to agriculture, James said. Farming can be good therapy for those dealing with PTSD. The VA provides some funding, but not enough. Trump leaned forward, suddenly engaged. Interesting. I've been pushing VA reform since taking office. I know, James acknowledged. That's one area where we probably agree. We should be doing more, Trump said. Veterans returning home shouldn't have to fight another battle for benefits. That's exactly what I tell my congressman, James said with emphasis. Exact words. Martha watched them, a slight smile on her face. Would you believe these two were nearly shouting at each other an hour ago? She said to no one in particular. The lead Secret Service agent cleared his throat. Sir, we should prepare to leave. Trump nodded but turned back to James. Your program, what's it called? Growing Forward, James replied. We've helped about 50 vets so far. Small scale, but meaningful. Trump pulled out his phone, typing something. I want my VA secretary to hear about this. Directly from you, not filtered through staff. James raised his eyebrows. You serious? Dead serious, Trump replied. It's a good program. Helps veterans, supports farming. Makes perfect sense. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and rays of late afternoon sun were breaking through the clouds. The storm was passing, but something had shifted in the farmhouse during those tense hours. Mr. President, the agent insisted, the motorcade is ready. Trump stood, straightening his jacket. James, Martha, thank you for your hospitality. Anyone would have done the same, Martha said, but her tone was warmer now. As they moved toward the door, Trump turned to James. You know, we still disagree on plenty. Oh, I know that, James nodded, a half-smile on his face. Believe me, I know. But, Trump continued, I heard some things today I needed to hear. Real things, not talking points. James extended his hand. That's a start, I suppose. Trump shook it firmly. Maybe more than a start. The two men looked at each other, an unlikely connection formed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Neither could have predicted what would happen next. James leaned back in his chair, his hands gesturing as he spoke about his father's struggles with loan denials in the 1980s. The rain continued to drum on the roof, creating a rhythm behind his words. They'd approve loans for white farmers with the same credit, same collateral, James explained. But my daddy would get turned down, year after year. Called it lack of experience, even though our family had been farming this land since before the loan officer was born. Trump listened, his fingers laced together, his expression thoughtful. The usual defensiveness that appeared when people criticized government policies was absent. "And how about now?" he asked. "Still happening?" "It's more subtle," James said. "But yes, the numbers don't lie. Black farmers get fewer loans, smaller amounts, higher interest rates." Martha appeared from the kitchen with a plate of homemade cookies. "These were meant for the church social tomorrow, but I think we need them more right now." She offered the plate to Trump first, a small courtesy that didn't go unnoticed. He took one, thanking her with a nod. "Your home is lovely," he said. "Reminds me of places I visited growing up." "Been in my family for 3 generations," Martha replied. "Would have been gone by now if not for James's stubbornness." "Determination," James corrected with a smile. "Stubbornness is what you call it when it doesn't work out." Trump laughed, a genuine laugh, not the performative one from campaign rallies. "My father used to say something similar." A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the storm outside. Through the window, they could see the rain starting to let up, though dark clouds still hung low. "Your grandkids?" Trump asked, nodding toward a photo on the side table showing 2 children playing on a tractor. James nodded, pride softening his face. "Thomas is 8, Lisa just turned 6. They live in Atlanta with their parents, but they spend summers here." "Do they want to farm?" Trump asked. James and Martha exchanged glances. "We want them to have the choice," Martha said carefully. "But the way things are going—" "I understand," Trump said, surprising them both. "Family businesses, doesn't matter if it's real estate or farming, they're special. Different from just making money." One of the Secret Service agents by the window spoke quietly into his earpiece, then approached. "Sir, weather report shows the cell is moving east. We should have a window to leave in about 20 minutes." Trump nodded but seemed in no hurry. He turned back to James. "You mentioned veterans issues earlier. What's your connection there?" "I help run a program for vets transitioning to agriculture," James said. "Farming can be good therapy for those dealing with PTSD. The VA provides some funding, but not enough." Trump leaned forward, suddenly engaged. "Interesting. I've been pushing VA reform since taking office." "I know," James acknowledged. "That's one area where we probably agree." "We should be doing more," Trump said. "Veterans returning home shouldn't have to fight another battle for benefits." "That's exactly what I tell my congressman," James said with emphasis. Exact words. Martha watched them, a slight smile on her face. "Would you believe these two were nearly shouting at each other an hour ago?" she said to no one in particular. The lead Secret Service agent cleared his throat. "Sir, we should prepare to leave." Trump nodded but turned back to James. "Your program, what's it called?" "Growing Forward," James replied. "We've helped about 50 vets so far. Small scale, but meaningful." Trump pulled out his phone, typing something. "I want my VA secretary to hear about this. Directly from you, not filtered through staff." James raised his eyebrows. "You serious?" "Dead serious," Trump replied. "It's a good program. Helps veterans, supports farming. Makes perfect sense." Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and rays of late afternoon sun were breaking through the clouds. The storm was passing, but something had shifted in the farmhouse during those tense hours. "Mr. President," the agent insisted, "the motorcade is ready." Trump stood, straightening his jacket. "James, Martha, thank you for your hospitality." "Anyone would have done the same," Martha said, but her tone was warmer now. As they moved toward the door, Trump turned to James. "You know, we still disagree on plenty." "Oh, I know that," James nodded, a half-smile on his face. "Believe me, I know." "But," Trump continued, "I heard some things today I needed to hear. Real things, not talking points." James extended his hand. "That's a start, I suppose." Trump shook it firmly. "Maybe more than a start." The two men looked at each other, an unlikely connection formed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Neither could have predicted what would happen next. The sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the wet fields. Instead of rushing to leave, Trump surprised everyone by asking, Could you show me around before we go? I'd like to see your operation. James hesitated, glancing at Martha, who gave a slight nod. Sure, he said, though it's pretty muddy out there now. A Secret Service agent stepped forward. Sir, we're already behind schedule. Reschedule the next stop, Trump replied firmly. This is important. James led the way out the back door, with Trump and 2 agents following. The others remained inside, speaking urgently into their devices. Martha watched from the porch, arms crossed, a thoughtful expression on her face. Watch your step, James warned as they navigated the slick path to a red barn. The fresh after-rain smell filled the air, and birds had begun singing again. Inside the barn, James showed Trump his equipment, an aging tractor, a combine harvester that had seen better days, tools hanging neatly on the wall. Most of this is second-hand, James explained. Can't afford new. That tractor there, I've rebuilt the engine 3 times. Trump ran his hand along the tractor's fender. American-made. They don't build them like this anymore. No, they don't, James agreed. Problem is, the new ones have all the computerized systems. When they break, you need a specialist with a laptop to fix them. Costs a fortune. Trump nodded, surprisingly attentive. Big companies want farmers dependent on their tech, their seeds, their chemicals. Exactly, James said, slightly surprised by Trump's understanding. And when we're dependent, we're vulnerable. They moved to the far end of the barn where a small office was set up, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a computer that looked at least 5 years old. This is where I fight my battles, James said with a wry smile. Paperwork, regulations, loan applications. Spend more time here than in the field some days. He pulled out a thick folder. This is just the USDA paperwork from last year. Forms for everything: subsidies, conservation programs, crop insurance. Miss one deadline, make one mistake, and you're done. Trump took the folder, flipping through it with genuine interest. Bureaucracy. I've been fighting it since day one. Difference is, James said quietly, you can hire people to handle it. Small farmers like me, we do it ourselves, after working all day in the fields. Trump handed back the folder, his expression thoughtful. Too many regulations, been saying it for years. Some regulations we need, James countered. Clean water, safe food, that's important, but there's a difference between protecting people and burying them in paperwork. Trump nodded slowly. Fair point. James opened a drawer and pulled out another folder. These are my grandfather's papers. He started with 40 acres in 1937. By the time my father took over, we had 120. Now I work 300 but only own half. Rest is leased. He spread out old photos on the desk, black and white images of a proud black man standing in fields, of family gatherings, of children sitting on the same tractor now rusting in the barn. This is more than just business, James said, his voice low. It's heritage, it's family. When a farm fails, it's not just money lost. It's generations of knowledge, of connection to the land. Trump studied the photos, unusually quiet. In one, a young boy sat on a man's shoulders, both grinning widely. That's me and my daddy, James explained. Summer of '72. Cotton harvest. You look happy, Trump said. We were, James replied. Didn't have much, but we had this place. And each other. A silence fell between them, filled only by the dripping of water from the barn roof. You know, Trump finally said, I grew up in real estate, my father's business. Different world from farming, but I understand family legacy. James nodded. That's something most politicians don't get. They see numbers, policies. They don't see faces, families. I'm not most politicians, Trump said with a hint of his usual bravado. James actually smiled. No, you're certainly not. As they walked back toward the house, Trump asked questions about crop rotation, about seed prices, about the challenges of weather patterns changing. James answered honestly, neither holding back criticism nor exaggerating problems. The Secret Service agents exchanged glances. This wasn't the confrontation they'd expected when the president had stepped out of his car to speak with a farmer who clearly wasn't a supporter. Before they reached the house, Trump paused. You know, James, I think I've learned more about farming in the last hour than in all the briefings I've had in Washington. James looked at him directly. That's because you're hearing it from someone who lives it, not someone who studies it. Trump extended his hand. I won't forget this conversation. As they shook hands, both men realized something had changed. What had started as a clash of opposing viewpoints had somehow become a moment of genuine connection. 2 weeks later, James's phone rang while he was fixing an irrigation pipe. He wiped his hands on his jeans before answering. Mr. Wilson, this is Carol from the White House Office of Public Liaison. James nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me. President Trump asked me to contact you regarding an agricultural advisory committee he's forming. He'd like you to participate. That evening, James and Martha sat at their kitchen table, the invitation letter spread out before them. Martha read it for the third time, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. It's real, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. The presidential seal and everything. Could be just for show, James said, stirring his coffee. Get a black farmer at the table, snap some photos, then ignore everything I say. Martha gave him a look. Maybe, but what if it's not? James stared out the window at the setting sun casting golden light across his fields. That's what I keep asking myself. The next morning, James called his cousin Roy, who ran a small farm 2 counties over. You're joking, Roy said when James told him about the invitation. Dead serious. Got the letter right here. And you're considering it? After everything you've said about his policies? James sighed. I'm thinking about it. What good does it do to just keep complaining if I turn down a chance to actually be heard? They won't listen to you, Roy warned. It's politics, James. Maybe, but what if they do? That night, James couldn't sleep. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Martha, and went downstairs. He made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. At the top, he wrote, "Why say yes and why say no?" Under why say no, he listed political stunt, waste of time. People will think I've sold out, might just be used for PR. Under why say yes, he wrote, chance to represent small farmers, could make real change, direct access to decision makers. Standing on the outside hasn't worked so far. He was still sitting there when Martha came down at dawn. You decided, she asked softly. I'm going to say yes, James replied, but with conditions. 3 days later, James was on a conference call with Carol from the White House and 2 other staffers. Mr. Wilson, we're thrilled you've accepted the president's invitation, Carol said. We'll need you in Washington next month for the first meeting. Before I commit, James said firmly, I need to understand something. Is this committee just for show, or will our recommendations be taken seriously? There was a pause on the line. The president specifically said you'd ask that, Carol finally replied. He told me to tell you that he wants real farmers with real experience, not just people who'll agree with everything he says. Good, James said, then I have conditions. He could almost hear the surprise in their silence. First, I want at least 2 other minority farmers on the committee. Second, I want at least 1 session focused specifically on the challenges facing small family farms. And third, I want a direct line to whoever is implementing the recommendations. No filters, no middlemen. He expected pushback, excuses. Instead, after a brief pause, Carol said, I'll need to run this by the president, but I don't see any issues with these requests. 2 days later, James got a text message from a number he didn't recognize. Conditions accepted. Looking forward to working together. DJT. James showed the message to Martha, who read it twice. Well, she said finally, I guess you're going to Washington. The news spread quickly through their community. Some neighbors were supportive, others skeptical. James's cousin Roy was particularly vocal. You're being used, Roy insisted during Sunday dinner at James's house. They'll parade you around as their token black farmer, then ignore everything you say. Maybe, James acknowledged. But I've spent years complaining about policies made by people who've never set foot on a farm. Now I have a chance to be in the room. I have to try. Later that week, a package arrived from Washington. Inside was a folder with details about the committee, meeting schedules, and a personal note from Trump. James, looking forward to having a real farmer with real experience on the team. Bring your straight talk to Washington. We need it. DJT. As James put the folder on his desk, next to the photos of his grandfather and father, he felt a strange mix of hope and apprehension. He had no illusions about changing Washington overnight. But for the first time in years, he felt like someone was actually listening. Martha came into the office and put her hand on his shoulder. "You ready for this?" James covered her hand with his. "Not really. But sometimes the most important paths are the ones you never expected to walk." 6 months later, James stood at the podium in a conference room at the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. Behind him sat the President, the Secretary of Agriculture, and 12 other committee members, a diverse group including a Hispanic orchard owner from California, an Asian American rice farmer from Arkansas, and several small farm operators from across the country. "Small family farms are the backbone of rural America," James said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for fair access to markets, for loan programs that don't discriminate, and for regulations that understand the difference between a family operation and a corporate farm with 1,000 employees." Cameras flashed. This wasn't the committee's first meeting, but it was the first open to the press. James had worried it would just be a photo opportunity, but to his surprise, the committee had done real work over the past months. Trump nodded as James spoke. They still disagreed on plenty. James had made his opposition to certain policies crystal clear in previous closed-door sessions, but there was also an unexpected respect between them. After the formal presentation, reporters swarmed around them. "Mr. President, is this committee just for show?" one shouted. Trump stepped to the microphone. "You know, before I met James Wilson, I thought I understood farming." "I didn't. This committee, these real farmers, they're teaching Washington more than Washington is teaching them." A reporter turned to James. "Mr. Wilson, you've been critical of this administration's agricultural policies in the past. Has your position changed?" James took a moment before answering. "My position is the same as it's always been. I stand for fair treatment of small farmers, especially minority farmers who faced discrimination. What's changed is having a seat at the table instead of shouting from outside." "And has the president listened?" the reporter pressed. "Sometimes," James said with a small smile. "We don't agree on everything. Never will. But there's more listening happening than I expected." That evening, back at his hotel room, James called Martha. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Better than I thought. The soil health initiative we pushed for is going to happen, and they're reviewing the loan approval process for minority farmers." "I saw you on the news," Martha said, standing right next to him. "Your daddy would have never believed it." "I know," James replied quietly. "Sometimes I don't believe it myself." 2 weeks later, James was back on his farm, the Washington trip already feeling like a distant dream as he repaired a fence line damaged by recent winds. His phone rang, a local number. "Hello, James. It's Pete from the bank. Got some news for you." James tensed. He'd applied for a loan to upgrade his irrigation system months ago. "Your loan's been approved," Pete said, "full amount." James nearly dropped the phone. "You serious? Last time we talked, you said it was unlikely." Things changed. There's a new directive about evaluating farm loans. Less emphasis on credit history, more on operational viability. Your farm qualifies easily under the new guidelines. After hanging up, James sat on the tailgate of his truck, staring across his fields. Was it a coincidence? Or had the committee's recommendations about loan access already filtered down to local banks? That Saturday, the local paper ran a feature story. "Local farmer brings change to Washington." James cringed at the headline, but read the article anyway. It was surprisingly fair, quoting both supporters and critics. His cousin Roy called after reading it. "Still think you're being used?" "Hard to say," James admitted. "But some good things are happening. The fight's not over, but at least now someone's listening." In October, James received an invitation to speak at a farming conference in Chicago. The organizer mentioned that they'd also invited representatives from large agricultural corporations, the same ones James had criticized for monopolistic practices. "Perfect," James said. "Put us on the same panel. It's time we talk to each other, not just about each other." Martha smiled as he hung up the phone. "Look at you, the diplomat." James shook his head. "Not a diplomat. Just tired of all the fighting with no results. Sometimes you need to sit across the table from someone you disagree with to find solutions that work for everyone." As he walked out to check his fields that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, James thought about that rainy day months ago when the president's motorcade had stopped outside his farm. Neither man had changed the other's mind about everything. They still came from different worlds, with different values and priorities, but they had found something rare in today's divided America: the ability to disagree without dismissing each other entirely, to listen across differences, and to find those small patches of common ground where real progress could take root and grow.